Delving into the era known as the crisis of the 3rd century reveals one of the most turbulent and defining periods in the history of the Roman Empire. But what exactly caused this catastrophe, and what were its underlying reasons? The answers lie in the decades immediately preceding this pivotal moment. During these years, the once fragile, yet existing, balance of power between the venerable Senate in Rome, which traditionally and nominally held the right to elevate rulers to the imperial throne, and the powerful imperial army, shifted rapidly. Gradually, but inexorably, real power concentrated in the steel embrace of the legions. The emperor was no longer what was called the princeps, first among equals, a man who stood at the head of the state by virtue of his authority and the consent of the elites. From then on, his status was determined by different criteria. He transformed into a successful, perhaps even ruthless, military commander, whose ascent to power was directly linked to promises of generous donatives or monetary rewards to his soldiers, who proclaimed him emperor. This change fundamentally altered the very nature of imperial power, opening the way to unprecedented instability, the full consequences of which were yet to be felt. One key player who significantly accelerated this process was Septimius Severus. His reign was marked by an unparalleled drive to appease the empire's military machine, and in essence, he openly bought their loyalty by generously increasing their pay. As part of his radical measures, each soldier's annual pay was increased from 300 to an impressive 500 denarii. However, such large-scale expenditures required equally large-scale sources of funding, and to ensure these payments, Severus resorted to a dangerous, though outwardly innocuous, step. He debased the imperial currency, reducing the precious metal content in coins. Although this first significant debasement did not lead to an immediate and catastrophic economic collapse, it set a highly dangerous precedent that his successors would actively exploit, plunging the financial system into chaos. Moreover, this policy of appeasing the military had far more profound consequences for the very structure of power. Severus not only weakened the traditional, established position of the emperor but also took the first decisive steps to make this highest state office entirely and unequivocally dependent on the loyalty and whims of the army. Undoubtedly, imperial power had always relied to some extent on military support, but under Severus and his successors, this appeasement of the army became unprecedentedly pronounced, transforming into the dominant factor, while the once influential significance of the Senate was greatly reduced, practically to a symbolic level. These changes, once set in motion, inexorably led the empire to the brink of grand upheavals whose power was capable of changing its fate forever. And this was just the beginning of the story of how a great power found itself on the verge of collapse. The Severan dynasty ceased to exist because its last ruler, Emperor Severus Alexander, proved incapable of pacifying the belligerent legions. It was the soldiers who took his life and then elevated the military commander Maximinus Thrax to the imperial throne. This event initiated a pattern that would dominate for the next 5 decades. Dissatisfied military contingents constantly put forward their commanders for the imperial throne, promising them immense wealth and comprehensive patronage in return. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that during the same historical period, the Roman Empire faced unprecedented enemy invasions that required prompt and effective command simultaneously in many different border regions. Consequently, soldiers often promoted their general to emperor so that he could focus exclusively on defending their particular section of the empire. This became one of the key reasons why Gaul subsequently separated from the main territory of the empire. The external challenges facing the empire took on a significantly more formidable character than in previous decades. In the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire, which succeeded the Parthian kingdom, proved to be an incomparably more aggressive and effective adversary for Rome, constantly threatening its eastern borders. The northern tribes living along the Danube and Rhine, by that time, had centuries of interaction with Rome and gradually evolved in different ways in response to Roman influence. In part, their development was a direct consequence of Roman stimulation. Roman diplomatic practice, for example, treated all participants in bilateral interactions as if they possessed institutional frameworks equivalent to Rome's, and undoubtedly, prolonged contacts of this kind contributed to the institutional formation of these tribes along lines consistent, if not fully identical, with Roman perceptions. Meanwhile, Small tribal formations that had long bordered Roman lands in Germania united into more formidable tribal confederations, such as the well-known Franks and Alemanni. Furthermore, on the Danubian frontier, the Goths appeared, who soon became a chronic and intractable problem for Roman authorities in that region. The new Persian Empire, asserting its ambitions, had already invaded Roman territories in 230 AD, and this act of aggression was merely a harbinger of future upheavals. Over the next 5 decades, the Roman Empire faced the bitter consequences of its internal contradictions and foreign policy. Numerous foreign armed groups rampaged on its borders, crossing the Rhine and Danube unimpeded, penetrating through the Hellespont, and devastating cities in Syria and the east. The empire experienced a profound crisis on many fronts simultaneously, reaching almost unprecedented levels of pressure. The long series of these attacks provoked a severe labor shortage, which, again, was unparalleled in previous history. This occurred immediately after the devastating Antonine Plague, which significantly hampered response measures and subsequent recovery, and the situation was exacerbated by the Cyprian Plague, which claimed the lives of even high-ranking officials such as Emperors Justinian and Claudius Gothicus. The multi-front crisis not only revealed but also significantly worsened the accompanying military and political weaknesses of the imperial administrative structures. The empire desperately needed effective military leadership in many directions simultaneously, at the very least, experienced commanders whose authority would extend over entire provinces to coordinate actions along the entire length of the border. However, since the existing system effectively turned every successful military commander into a potential claimant to the imperial throne, the creation of comprehensive commands was perceived as a direct threat to imperial interests. Such special powers had been granted in previous decades, but only under strong emperors, and then often given to either members of the imperial family or commanders with impeccable loyalty. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this large-scale crisis, the Roman Empire lacked the firm hand of a strong emperor. The last powerful ruler was Septimius Severus, who reigned decades earlier, and, as already noted, he contributed in his own way to exacerbating the problem. Attempts were made to stabilize the situation, but the last 2 emperors of the Severan dynasty were merely youths who seemed to be entirely under the influence of their mothers and grandmother. The incessant military confrontation gave rise to a profound economic crisis. The Roman Empire operated a complex monetary system based on precious metals, where the value of coins nominally depended both on the quantity of noble metal and on the exchange rate at which the central government exchanged bronze coins for silver, and silver for gold. Under conditions of already increased army salaries and the urgent need to promise colossal donatives, further inflation arose, which, in turn, triggered a prolonged currency debasement, thereby initiating a vicious cycle. Nevertheless, the overall situation was not as bleak as it is sometimes portrayed. Debasement apparently did not entail strictly proportional inflation, but this by no means implied an absence of deep-seated problems. Devaluation clearly signaled the central government's urgent need for funds, which it could not satisfy through conventional taxation methods, and locally, the population gradually lost trust in the currency in use. A natural consequence of increased military activity and the inability to maintain the integrity of the empire's borders was a significant reduction in internal trade, as well as a noticeable increase in bandit and pirate activity, which further exacerbated the already difficult economic situation. Herodian reports in his works that the harsh tax increases introduced during the time of Maximinus Thrax caused unprecedented unrest among the population and ultimately led to the large-scale rebellions of 238. Amidst the Roman Empire's evident inability to effectively maintain its hegemony, doubts began to surface in the minds of many subjects regarding the favor of the traditional Roman gods. Naturally, this led to a significant increase in distrust towards Jews and, especially, Christians, as their belief strictly forbade them from offering sacrifices for the prosperity of the state. In response to this state of affairs, emperors were compelled to issue edicts obliging every citizen to make sacrifices both for the well-being of the realm and personally for the emperor. Those who dared to defy these directives faced severe consequences. They were thrown to lions, and all their property was immediately confiscated in favor of the treasury. The crisis period was characterized by a combination of several key factors. Among them were the steadily increasing power of the armies, often interfering in political life, serious problems with the legitimacy and ideological justification of imperial power, a complete collapse of the existing monetary system, a profound religious and moral crisis that gripped society. Added to this were large-scale invasions by foreign peoples, which affected almost all border regions and even penetrated deep into the empire, as well as a noticeable transition from the sole rule of the emperor to the dominance of a military despot. All these interconnected phenomena provoked a widespread deterioration in the quality of public services and caused general instability. It is noteworthy that many of the listed factors were not new to the 3rd century crisis, but it was during this period that they seemingly reached their peak or, at the very least, significantly intensified, creating unprecedented pressure on the Roman state. Among the most significant and long-term consequences of the 3rd century crisis are 3 key aspects. First and foremost, it involved the profound destruction of Rome's vast and complex internal trade network, which had for centuries served as the foundation of its economic prosperity. Secondly, there was a steady decline in the influence and significance of the Senate. Senators were now forbidden from governing provinces or commanding military forces. Thus, the last echo of the old republic finally and irrevocably disappeared. The empire was now under the rule of a military despot, and there was no need to appease the Senate, as emperors spent the overwhelming majority of their time far from the eternal city. This factor leads us to the third important consequence. As the empire's rulers increasingly resided in border regions where security and defense issues were resolved, the central role and significance of the city of Rome steadily diminished. The imperial court and the entire state apparatus instead moved with the sovereign to those areas that required his direct presence and attention. Although this period seemingly could have heralded the premature collapse of the Roman Empire, it paradoxically turned out to be merely a profound transitional stage in rich Roman history. The renowned historian Robert Latouche noted in his works, "After the reign of the Severins, we seem to plunge into a long tunnel, only to emerge at the beginning of the late empire, with Diocletian. And when we emerge into the light again, an unfamiliar country lies around us." And indeed, to a significant extent, this statement holds true. The familiar classical world irrevocably disappeared, and humanity found itself in a completely new, alien era, late antiquity. The tunnel, mentioned by Latouche, primarily symbolizes the acute lack of reliable and comprehensive historical sources that could be fully relied upon to study this time. The empire underwent colossal transformations during this period, but the details of these changes remain largely hidden from us.